All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session of American Public Policy Redux. So happy to have you here. We are very excited to be talking about gerrymandering tonight with Professor Ranjan Rothodgi. Did I say that correctly, Professor?
Yep, Rothodgi.
Awesome. And as always, we are being recorded. So if you have a question, which jump in at any time, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to know that or jump in, but know that you're going to be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, simply send your question or comment on over to me in the chat box and I can answer it for you. And I think that is about it. With that, I'll send it on over to St. Mary's professor, which I should have said at the beginning, which is very exciting, of associate or assistant professor of computer science?
Math.
My apologies. Go right on ahead. We're very excited to learn about gerrymandering tonight.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So so I started at St. Mary's 5 years ago, and maybe 3 years ago, Pat and I co-taught a class called the Mathematics of Voting. I've been interested in politics. I was not a poli-sci major, unfortunately, but it seemed there's lots of places where math and political science intersect, and so Pat and I co-taught this class, and then I taught it again just last fall, or actually in January. We had a J term this year due to the crazy scheduling. And then I applied for and was named to the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission. So I had, my background in gerrymandering before this was like purely academic and mathematical, but now we've been, holding public hearings, getting public testimony. I've been meeting with a lot of state legislators because gerrymandering, they're going to be drawing maps and redistricting once the census data is in later this year. And it's fascinating. I've learned a ton about the process. And so I'm going to share what I know with you. So let me share my screen here real quick. There will be some math in this talk because that's like how I got interested in gerrymandering, was from a mathematical point of view. Lots of people always say, oh, like we can fix gerrymandering by just having a computer draw some lines on a map for us, and then all the districts will be nice. And yeah, we could definitely do that, but that won't get us what we actually want to get us. All right, so so there will be a little bit of math, but let's start with some background here. All right, so so the history, gerrymandering has been happening for 200 years, more than 200 years in the U.S. And it got its name from Elbridge Gerry, who redistricted Massachusetts to favor his party, right? And so this district here kind of looks like a salamander. So Gerry and Mander became gerrymander. So it's been happening for a long time. And so let's just look at the Indiana districts over the last like 30 years. So from 93 to 2002, Indiana had 10 congressional districts, just based on our population. Deciding how many districts and how many representatives each state gets in apportionment is also fascinating from a mathematical point of view, but we'll leave that aside for right now. So that's what the districts looks like in most of the 90s. And then we lost the districts after redistricting after the 2000 census. So the districts looked like that. And there's some weird things going on, right? Like, why does it make sense that Evansville and Terre Haute, you're going more than halfway north, in Indiana? Like, what does Evansville and this area up here have in common? Or, why is this section connected over here up with this section? I don't know, maybe that, now that I look at it, I think that's Lafayette, and that might be Bloomington down there, right? So, pack a bunch of college towns into one district and give it away. But yeah, we'll get to that. And over here, you see Kokomo is included in this district with South Bend. And then here's what our districts look like right now. And actually, if you look at the districts now, they actually look better in the point of view of the district. Like the shapes make a little bit more sense maybe than they did the 20 years prior to this. So that's how the districts have changed. We lost a district starting in 2000 just based on population. But that's what the district looks like today, at least in the congressional level. Our state house and state senate districts, so there's 100 state house districts and 50 state senate districts. Those also, for the most part, look pretty reasonable, but there are some things going on in all of these districts that maybe aren't ideal. All right, so why do we redistrict? Just some background. populations increase and decrease, people move. And so we need to draw districts so that they follow some basic rules. Each congressional district, at least for those, must be in one state. They all have to have about the same population. There are rules about how close those populations have to be. So I think when we redistrict this time, the average district in the country will have about 750 or 730,000 people in it. Districts must be contiguous, right? So you must be able to get from one part of a district to any other part of a district kind of just by walking. In most cases, there's islands and some other issues. And then redistricting, you can't violate the Voting Rights Act. So basically what that means is you can't discriminate on the basis of race. And then there are some states, Indiana is not one of them, that have some other state-specific guidelines as well in terms of what criteria should be at least attempted to be met when drawing these lines. So, but that's it. There's not much set in stone about what we have to do when the lines are redrawn. So, right, so we redistrict every 10 years after the US Census. Broadly speaking, there are kind of like 3 different ways that states redistrict, but there's a lot more differences than just these 3. So 9 states have some type of commission. That could be an independent commission that does not include politicians on it, or a political commission. So 9 states have commissions. 7 states, at least at the congressional level, don't even have to deal with the issue. Their populations are just too small, so the entire state is the district. And then in 34 states, the state legislature basically has control. Now, some of these states do it better than other ones. So for example, in Iowa, the state legislature has control, but Iowa is really not gerrymandered at all for reasons that are kind of specific to how their process works. But Indiana is one of these where the state legislature has control, and we are extremely gerrymandered, in my opinion, at least. And so, right, in an ideal world, one of the goals of redistricting would be to create fair districts. And this word fair is, I don't know, not well defined at all, because who knows what fair means, right? So one thing that you might want is proportional representation to the electorate. So, in Indiana, in our recent statewide elections, Republicans generally get somewhere between like 52 and 57% of the vote. But our state legislature and our congressional delegation, between 70 to 80% of those representatives are Republican, right? So there's a big gap between the percentage of the vote that party gets and the percentage of the representation that they have. So proportional representation might be what you mean by fair, but also not necessarily, right? Maybe it would be fair if every district represented the state. So every district would have 55% getting Republican vote approximately, and the 41 or 42% getting Democratic vote. But then in that case, you'd have most likely all your districts go to Republicans, right? Because each district would have more Republicans than Democrats. So this word fair is not well defined. And so the problem is that what happens is that in states where the legislatures have control, especially if they have a super majority like they do in Indiana, like the Republicans do, the goal can just be to win, right? Just maximize the number of seats that your party can get. And that's partisan gerrymandering. That's redistricting to just favor your party, or to make safe seats so that certain people continue to win. And so that's kind of what we want to avoid as the people, and not we as the legislature. So gerrymandering is manipulating the boundaries of a district to gain an unfair partisan advantage. And so how can we tell when the boundaries are unfair? So this was my entrance into the world of gerrymandering a few years ago, right? How can we tell when boundaries are unfair is a problem that can maybe be addressed mathematically. So something that we might look at are if there's lots of safe seats or non-competitive races. So in Indiana, for example, in 2020, there were 125 seats in the state legislature, 125 races. Half the senators were not up for re-election. And out of those 125, I think 40 or 41, there was just they were just not contested, right? So the incumbent ran unopposed. So that's not good. And most of the other ones were not close either. Only one of our 9 congressional elections ended up being within 16 percentage points, So lots of safe seats or non-competitive races can maybe clue us in that there's some gerrymandering going on. Weird shapes can also clue us in that maybe there's some gerrymandering going on. Lots of people feeling that their votes have been wasted. If we can quantify that, that can also kind of guide us to maybe think that there's some gerrymandering. Just one of these things on its own, if you only have weird shapes, but maybe the races are still competitive, or if you only have just a few safe seats, but everything else is fine, right? Then it's maybe harder to tell. But if all of these three things are present, then you probably have some gerrymandering going on. All right, so let's do some math here. So here's a small example that's not at all representative of how people live, right? So this state that I've drawn here is a rectangle. There's 25 voters, right? And there's no issue of like population density here. Each square is one voter and they're all kind of equally spaced out. And so we have 25 voters, 15 support the Green Party and 10 support the Orange Party. Let's suppose we need to draw 5 districts with 5 people each. How can we do it? Well, there's a bunch of ways that we could do this. So for example, I don't know, we might just want to draw nice vertical rectangles here. And if we do this, it looks like green wins 3 of them, right? So green wins 4-1 there, 3-2 there, 4-1 there, and then orange wins the other 2, right? And so there we have, if we drew our districts like that, we'd have some proportional representation, right? We'd have 60% of the seats and 60% of the voters are for the Green Party and 40% for the Orange. If we made them horizontally instead, right, then the green would win that district, green would also win this district, and this one, and that one. So green would win 4 out of the 5. But we can actually make green win as many as all 5, or we can actually have orange have the majority representation. So, all right, so the one on the top left was the one that I drew on the previous page. Green wins 3, orange wins 2. If you do some kind of crazy things, so up here on the top right, let me draw them if you can't see them very well. Right, so if we draw them as I've done here, green wins every single district 3-2. Right, and so that's an example of cracking. So what cracking is you take the voters of the other party and you kind of distribute them evenly amongst a bunch of districts so that dilutes their voting power. So they don't have like a strong constituency in one district. So that's called cracking. On the bottom left, we've actually found a way to actually make orange win 3 of the 5 seats. So orange wins the one along the bottom here, and this other one right here. Nope, I drew that incorrectly. Right here, and then the one in the top left. And then green wins the other 2. And so in this picture, we have packing and cracking. So packing means you put a lot of voters of the other party. You just give them some districts. You can't win all of them, so you just give them some districts and have them win overwhelmingly. So here, green wins 5-0. Up here, green wins 4-1. So we overwhelmingly give those districts away. And then the remaining green voters, we crack amongst the remaining 3 districts. 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. And so orange ekes out a win in each of those 3-2. So that's actually essentially what has happened in Indiana. Even if you just look at it on the congressional level, right? The district that includes Indianapolis is overwhelmingly blue. And there's never, or at least recently, there has not been a close race there. And the district in the northwestern corner of the state, Gary, Hammond, up in that area, also goes fairly considerably blue. And then the rest of the districts, so the Democratic voters are kind of packed into those areas. And then the rest of the districts, the Republicans win, some by a lot and some by a little less, but none of the districts are particularly competitive. This might change here at the end of the year when the district lines are redrawn. That northwestern part of the state has kind of lost some population. So in area, at least, that district will have to expand. And so it's going to expand, take more of LaPorte County, or goes a little south. I don't know exactly what county that is. But then if you go south, then again, it's more rural areas. And then So that district might become more competitive. Oh, I see Anne's question here. How do you deal with independents? With the way the populace is at this point, right? So in Indiana, I mean, Indiana has a strong kind of third party with the libertarians. Like Rainwater got like 4% or something, 5% in the governor race. But it's so minor that it doesn't matter. There's never going to be, with these single member districts, there's never going to be enough of a third party, at least the way it's set up right now, for them to have any say, for them to have a chance of winning, at least, right? Because you don't need to get 50% to win. You just need to get more than everybody else. So it's not really an issue right now, at least in US politics on a large level. Cool. Other questions here?
And how, I mean, just thinking back to basics. So when you determine if an area is overwhelmingly blue or if an area is red, and that comes into play in determining fairness, what's the red or blue based on? Their last presidential vote overwhelmingly? Is it declaration of party? What's the determination?
Yeah, so right, so this is a great question. So 2010, I think the reason gerrymandering has become much more of a popular issue now than it was, 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, is because in 2010, to their credit, the Republicans did a phenomenal job of gerrymandering with the help of extremely good data. The data that's available can almost tell you, by the neighborhood or by the precinct, how people have historically voted. And as the polarization continues, you have fewer and fewer people splitting tickets or, voting red and then blue, or blue and then red in recent elections. So if you can go down to the neighborhood and, draw your lines to cut out 20 or 30 or 40 people only, you can really fine tune what you want. And the Republicans did that extremely well. I mean, obviously I don't think gerrymandering is a good thing, but I mean, they did it really, really well. And so, yeah, that historical data, right? You don't just rely on census data. If you did, you could still have where people live and levels of education, all those things can be proxies for party, but they're not nearly as good as kind of this third party data that can be collected about how people have historically voted, or just like stronger predictors based on demographics, right? You can just create these like voter profiles that can, that are extremely, extremely precise.
So can we just back up? I mean, are there any, and I should probably know this, but are there any federal requirements? I understand we have the Voting Rights Act, right? But what federal requirements are in place to guide decisions made by states with respect to creating these districts, these voting districts?
Yeah, essentially nothing. Voting Rights Act, districts' populations have to be within a certain percentage of each other, and they have to be contiguous for the most part, excluding islands and some few other small cases.
And specifically, what is the requirement with respect to the Voting Rights Act?
That you cannot gerrymander based on race.
Yeah, but what does that really mean?
Right. So the issue is that race is a decent proxy for party affiliation. Obviously, it's not great, but it's decent. So you're not allowed to. So the Voting Rights Act, one thing that it does do is it kind of incentivizes, and I don't know exactly how. I mean, maybe not incentivizes. It puts into place a mechanism whereby like creating majority minority districts. That's like a good thing to do, because if you don't have those, then minority representation is suppressed. But other than that, it's like really hard to determine if a gerrymander is by race or if it's by party. And partisan gerrymandering, right? The Supreme Court has kind of ignored that issue entirely. Ooh, Michelle, what's this link? I want to read it. but yeah, right. So the Supreme Court has kind of just punted on partisan gerrymandering, but racial, you cannot, I don't know exactly what the language is, but basically you cannot try to dilute the voting power of racial minorities.
But,
They're
but does
crucial.
that like literally mean within a state? So if you have a state and you have, I mean, of course, this could get really complicated, right? So even defining what a racial group is.
Yeah, Pat, jump in. You were about to say something.
But
well, the crucial thing there that the Roberts Court weakened was that if you were in a state that had historically been associated with segregation and various policies like that, you had to get legal approval for redrawing those districts,
Right.
and that just got kicked in the teeth by the Roberts Court. So the crucial thing there was that it put a hurdle in front of that kind of redistricting. Not that it wouldn't occur, but it made it more difficult. And the Roberts Court got rid of that.
So yeah, pre-clearance, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
So, right. It's I think it was
right.
I think it was called pre-clearance. So if you were a state that, to your point, Pat, had been historically documented and tagged as acting against, so I don't even know how to say it, but essentially, so.
Well, drawing their lines in a discriminatory fashion.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. That you had to, when you made any changes to your voting procedures or processes, you had to get approval from the Department of Justice. And correct, that went away not that long ago, right? Which essentially created all kinds of problems, but that's broader than just gerrymandering, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was talking to people who were involved in Indiana gerrymandering in 2010, and a lot of them said that they were surprised that some of these districts near Marion County were not challenged on the basis of racial gerrymandering, because I don't know the ins and outs of this, but right, like someone in the district who has cause has to be the one to challenge it.
Correct.
And so no one challenged it, and so now that's just how they are right now.
Yeah.
And it's that change in sort of the criteria for standing to sue. Now you have to have standing to sue. You have to have someone who is harmed by that change rather than it being an automatic kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't have the background. I don't know what those cases
but essentially, I mean, this is maybe more theoretical, but if you go back to, so to not violate the civil rights, precedents or laws, or so what, I mean, again, practically, how does that get implemented? I mean, do you add up the party affiliation of those minority groups and then determine that they have correct representation within a state? I mean, how does it actually work?
I do not know the ins and outs of that.
Okay.
Yeah, my guess. I mean, so I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know kind of like what that cutoff is. But for example, if you take like a region that has a fairly large population of like a racial minority, and you just crack it, like that's kind of like an egregious violation, and that's something that could be challenged, but I don't know kind of where that boundary is between what's challengeable and what's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can challenge it no matter what. If you make the claim that
sure,
and then it's a matter of how strongly you make your case. And Ranjan is hitting it right on the money, because you probably can't ever develop a sort of standard objective criterion. Then it's about how well you make your case.
Yeah, and so I don't know what, now that I think about this, right? So one of the members of the Supreme Court in one of these recent cases, they were talking about the efficiency gap, which we'll get to here in a little bit, which is one way to measure, quantify like wasted votes. And I think the quote was mathematical gobbledygook or something like that. So it's just like, yeah, I don't know how to like, yes, quantifying this it can be very difficult. So yeah, if we're good to go on, I mean, so these are the kind of the two metrics that I wanted to mention, where Polsby-Popper and Stephanopoulos-McGee are two different ways to measure gerrymandering, and one is more about shapes and compactness, and the other is about like how many votes are wasted and what the difference is between the two major parties in terms of wasted votes. But right, like taking this complicated system, you know, taking this complicated process and distilling it down to a number, one single number, which is what both of these metrics do, obviously loses a lot of the complexity of the issue. And so, right, like it's not an issue that's like easily tractable. So you kind of need to have some understanding about what these metrics actually do. And, you know, if a lot of them seem wrong, then maybe we have a gerrymander there, but there's no kind of cutoff. All right, so here's a little bit of math. The Polsby-Popper metric, right? This is one about how nice your shapes are. So what it does is it relates the area of a district to its perimeter. And so mathematically, a circle has the smallest perimeter for a given area. So what it does, the Polsby-Popper metric makes it so that the measure is equal to 1 if your district is exactly a circle, and it's closer and closer to 0 the more non-circular it is. So the formula is 4 times pi times the area of a district divided by the perimeter squared, and that just comes from, so if you plug in the area and the perimeter of a circle into here, it becomes 1. And so the closer it is to 0, the worse or weirder your shapes are. So here are some examples, right? So here's North Carolina's 12th from 2013 to 2017. And this is an example of a racial gerrymander here, right? So what did the Republicans in the North Carolina legislature do when they drew these lines, right? This is half of Charlotte. This is part of Greensboro over here and part of Winston-Salem, right? So basically they connected these majority minority areas of 3 cities, but it had to be contiguous. So they had to put all this stuff in the middle here. And they gave that district away, right? They packed that district full of presumably blue voters and then just gave it away. And so this Polsby-Popper score is extremely close to 0. And this district only lasted till 2017 because it was deemed unconstitutional. Here's Maryland's 3rd district, and it still looks like this today.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, so there's a couple of spots here, I think. Oh, maybe not this one, but I think like there's a couple of spots where like the district is contiguous by like 1 road. And yeah, it makes no sense. So if you compute this metric, yeah, 0.0321. Here's Pennsylvania's 7th from 2013 to 2018. This one was given the nickname Goofy Kicking Donald Duck. Right, and Pennsylvania's districts where the state Supreme Court said they were gerrymandered. So they had to be redrawn, right, in 2018. Yeah, right. So this one's egregious as well. Here's Illinois' 4th, and this is still how it looks till today. And this right here, this stretch right here is just I-294. Like, so no one lives there, right? It's just the highway essentially. And this also has a super low Polsby-Popper score. But right, like the problem is that this actually I don't think is a gerrymander. And the reason for that is because these 2 areas right here have fairly large Latino populations. And so if you kind of split these 2 areas apart or connected them in some other way, right, the Latino representation would be diluted and they might not have any representation, at least, you know, these Chicago Latinos in Congress. And so it's not just about hideous shapes. This is definitely hideous. This one's been called the earmuff district because that's what it looks like kind of sideways. But yeah, I'm not convinced that this is, I'm convinced that this was done on purpose to help a racial minority.
Or maybe exclude Oak Park.
Sorry?
Would it be done to exclude Oak Park?
Oh yeah, I mean, possibly, right? So I think if you, but my understanding is that if you kind of just made this district like this, the population right here would overwhelm the populations kind of above and below. And so then you still might, there's a good chance that you wouldn't have Latino representation. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
You
that-
have to look
that's a
at the
good-
overall state, right? I mean, that's what you're looking at, the overall state. How it's, what is at the end of the day, how is the distribution across the state given the number of Dems and Republicans, et cetera, right?
yeah, I mean, though there are other, I mean, this district, no matter kind of how you drew it, would be a Democratic district.
Right, but I'm talking about the goal, like if the
Oh.
state is overall 54% Republican and 48% or whatever Dem, the goal is to have some kind of representation that aligns to that numeric, right?
Yeah, but that might be your goal and my goal. But that's not like, that's not necessarily the goal of these legislatures.
Right, but I'm talking about, well, but with that, great point. But from a fairness perspective.
Right.
Even there, you know, you have the additional goal that Ranjan identified, and that's that you have historically underrepresented populations, and that was part of what case law had been. You know, that you wanted to make sure that you had districts that allowed for minority representation. So that, I mean, that's, you know, that's the reason Ranjan put this thing up. And so there's not like one, even in terms of fairness, there's not one single goal. There's not a, you know, the goals are both state level and district level. I mean, it's complicated.
Yeah, and the other thing is, right, we don't necessarily, like, proportional representation though isn't necessarily the goal, because not that it's necessarily possible this way. Right now, Indiana seems to be fair. You'd have 5 Republican and 4 Democrat, or 6 Republican and 3 Democratic districts. But I would absolutely consider it a gerrymander if all of those districts were extremely safe, even if the result was proportional. In my point of view, and this is just me, competition is a good thing, because if there's not competition, at least between the parties, then the way that you lose an election is you get primaried by somebody more extreme than you are, which discourages people in the legislature actually reaching across the aisle and working with other members of the legislature.
Let me do an amen and then put on other political consequences. If you take a look at states that have done redistricting commissions, where they have tried to create more competitive districts, turnout goes up. Increasing turnout is another goal that you might want to pursue when you design these districts. And the other thing is, when you don't have, this is hard to measure, but when you don't have competitive districts, you get less competent legislators. And it can be for the reasons that Ranjan is talking about. You get more extremist folks who are more ideological and don't respond to information and expertise. But one way or another, non-competitive districts harm both elections and governing. So it's a real good reason to try to make these more competitive.
Yeah,
And the states define that, correct, Pat? How they want to balance all that? For the most
yeah,
part.
some states do. So like Arizona has competition as a criteria that should be met, all else equal. But like Indiana, most states do not.
Right.
Most states just have their basic, you know, what the federal government tells them, and then their own, you know, rules, but very few. And so as part of the ICRC, we've been holding these hearings around the state, and we've heard from multiple people who were state legislators in the 70s or early 80s, and even one who was a state legislator into the 90s, who said they would have no chance of being elected in their own district today. Just not a chance, because they were actually people who like worked across the aisle, wanted to talk to, wanted to get things done that would like benefit their constituents. And so now today they would be painted as, caving to the opposition or whatever it is, and they wouldn't get elected. And, the other thing that we've been hearing a lot of is, my legislator hasn't held a town hall in 8 years. Every time I write them or call their office, I get a form letter and that's it, because they don't have to respond to constituents if they know they're going to win.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so that's my argument against just like guaranteeing that you want proportional representation as the end goal.
The one more thing, and I've been desperately trying to rediscover this article, but a while back, political scientists did a study where they got measures of constituency opinion and then took a look at legislator behavior in state legislatures. And you then predicted the behavior of those state legislators based on the opinion of their constituents. In other words, you're expecting representation. You're expecting that the policy positions held by constituents would be maybe not directly put into effect by legislators, but at least followed. So when you get that model, we're going to do some math, Ron John. You're going to like this. Nice. So they then did a regression analysis. And there were other control variables, but the upshot was draw a regression line that fits constituency opinion to legislator behavior. So if you're right on the line, if your state is right on the line, then you are accurately reflecting opinion of constituents in the state. And that's a good thing for democratic rule, right? Indiana had the largest residual of any state in the country. Residual means the greatest difference between what constituents actually believed and what their state legislators did. And that happens when you don't have competitive districts. So that's another reason to again, sort of embrace what Ron John is advocating in terms of having more competitive districts.
Yeah, and so Indiana, our voter turnout was 50th out of 50, I think, in 2014. This time in 2020, we were 42nd out of 50th, but our voter turnout is not good. Oh yeah, so let's skip some of this. Cool. All right, so let's talk about the efficiency gap, right? So this is one way to measure things that aren't just based on shape and maybe measure some method of competitiveness in a district. And the authors of this paper came out like 6 years ago, or maybe 8 years ago at this point. They are the first to tell you that this measure is not perfect. And if you think about it for a little while, you might be able to see some holes with it. But basically what you do is, let's say you're looking at our state delegation to the US House. So we're going to count wasted votes for each of the two major parties. And the way a vote is wasted is either if it's cast for the loser or if it's an extra vote cast for the winner, right? So to win a district, you just need more votes than whoever came in second place. So, if the second place person had 5 votes and you got 9 votes, you only needed 6. So those 3 extras were wasted. And then all the votes for the loser were wasted. So you count the wasted votes for each election for each district, but then you sum up the wasted votes over all the districts for each party. And then the efficiency gap is just the difference in the number of wasted votes by the party. So like, how many wasted votes there were for the Democrats, how many wasted votes there were for the Republicans, and you just divide that by the total number of votes. Now the efficiency gap is a number between 0 and 0.5. And the lower the better, right? So the lower this is, that means the number of wasted votes were about the same for the parties if this number is closer to 0. Let's just look at a small example. So let's just look at this one in the top left. So in this first column, orange wins 3-2. And so orange needed all of those votes to win, but green wasted 2. So green had 2 wasted votes. In this next column, green, you only need 3 to win a district here, but green got 4. So green had 1 wasted vote and orange also had 1 wasted vote. In this next one, orange had 2. In this next one, green had 2. And the last one, green has 1 and orange has 1. Was someone jumping in?
Sorry, I yawned.
Okay, you're good. So overall, if we add this all up, right? So green has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Green has 6 wasted votes and orange has 4 wasted votes. So then we would subtract those and we'd get 2 and we divide by the total number of votes, which is 25. And so that's what we did over in the top left. And so our efficiency gap is 0.08. These other ones where there was like cracking and packing, those efficiency gaps are much larger, right? So down here where orange somehow won 3 out of the 5, orange needed all of their votes to win those 3 districts basically. And a ton of greens were wasted, right? Green did not need 5 to win here. Green did not need 4 to win here. And so that's why the efficiency gap was much bigger in this example.
Is the efficiency gap bigger for packing? I'm new to, because I just learned those terms tonight. I've never heard of packing or cracking tonight. So
Yeah.
if there's a large number of packing districts, the math would work out that the efficiency gap would be bigger, closer to 0.5.
Right. And the way
Right.
it actually works in real life is packing and cracking almost have to go hand in hand. So, right, because people aren't exactly
Oh, okay.
living together. So you pack a couple of districts for the opposing party and then just crack the rest of those voters. And yeah, when you do that, this measure just spikes. So yeah, so how does Indiana do? By Polsby Popper, pretty good. We're one of the least, I think we're like in the top 10 states in terms of how reasonable our shapes look, not just in our congressional districts, but also in our state house and state senate districts. By the efficiency gap, we're not great at all. Our state house districts are the 6th most gerrymandered by this measure. And so, yeah, and neither of these measures are perfect, right? So Polsby Popper would tell me that that district in Chicago is horrible, but I personally think that it's not. So neither of these are perfect, but if you have a state that's really bad on a lots of different metrics, then that might be a hint that that there's a gerrymander. So yeah, so we talked about this a lot. What does fair mean? You might want nice shapes or proportional representation or competitive elections. You can't have all of those things at once. One big topic that we haven't discussed yet is communities of interest. So in general, some communities of interest are kind of a little obvious. So you want to keep counties together or cities together or school districts or townships, right? You don't want to split up a school district into multiple state districts, perhaps. But also, right, this can also go, just like in Chicago, that earmuff district kept the community of interest of kind of Latino voters together. So there's a higher likelihood of representation there. But also on a more local level, right, Elkhart has a huge RV industry. So kind of people who live and who work and live for the RV industry, like they might want to be in one district. So their representative kind of represents that constituency. Or if we're talking about like South Bend districts, maybe there's some districts in South Bend that have a lot of people who work for one of the colleges or universities, and they want representation. So you might want to keep communities of interest together as well. And that just adds another wrench in here, right? We definitely can't have all of these things at the same time. So yeah, a little bit about my work on the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission. So we're set up with 9 members, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 3 who are unaffiliated. We are a shadow commission. We have no power at all. Indiana's legislature can ignore us entirely, and we're hoping that doesn't happen. So the commission was actually put together by the All In for Democracy Coalition. So Common Cause, League of Women Voters, they're all part of that. We actually have one more public hearing. The next one is a week from right now, next Thursday at 7:30 p.m. If you want to register and attend, if you go to allinfordemocracy.org, click around, but there's a link to register. So what we're doing is, right, we're holding these public hearings, hearing what people want, and and all the past public hearings are recorded and on the All In for Democracy website. And we're going to compile a report, and we've been in the process of doing that. And so a lot of what we've been hearing is my legislators don't respond to me. They don't talk to their constituents. They don't work across the aisle, or things like, why is my county part of 5 different state Senate districts? That makes no sense. Like also issues like that. And then what we're going to do is we're not actually going to draw the maps. We're going to have a mapping competition. So once the census data is released, which should be in August or September, that data will be uploaded to this website, districter.org. And on that website, it's fairly user-friendly. You can just draw your own districts. And there's a bunch of different variables and information that's on the website. I'm happy to show you if you're interested. And you just draw your own districts, and it tells you what the populations are, so they're all nice. But you can also draw communities of interest as well. So you're like, oh, I want to keep, this area together and this area together and these areas together, and then kind of draw your districts on top of that. So we're gonna have a mapping competition for all 3 of the maps, right? We need US House of Representatives, we need those district maps, State House and State Senate. And so that's what we're gonna do. And so we've been in contact. We met with Senator Bray, who's the chair of the election committee, and we've met with a couple other state representatives. The General Assembly, though, in both houses has a Republican supermajority, 71 of the House seats, 39 of the Senate seats. So they could totally ignore us if they want. But we've been in good conversation with both Republicans and Democrats who are in the IGA. One thing that's not very promising is, over the past 5 years, there have been a lot of bills in either of the chambers that have just died in committee and maybe not even gotten a vote that would address gerrymandering. So some of these were, to Ann's question, some of these bills would just be more stringent about what criteria we should follow. But then some of these bills also were to create a redistricting commission like the one I'm on that actually would have some power. And many of them were bipartisan. So in 2020, there were 5 bills that addressed gerrymandering in some way. 2 of them were bipartisan, all 5 died in committee. And so that's kind of, when we hear those kinds of things, that's discouraging. But when we meet with the legislators, that can be encouraging. So we'll see what happens here.
Pat, you should definitely do that. You should you're retired. You should spend some time on the computer and show these people how it's supposed to be done.
Ron John and I already had a conversation about serving on this commission, because my wife, who has a different conception of retirement than I do, said, you should be on the commission. And I said, I'm retired, I'm not doing that. No, I leave this to more energetic and intelligent folks like Ron John to.
I don't know about either of those 2 things, Pat.
Tisk, Pat, really? You're not that old, just so you know.
No. It's not that. It's that the kinds of activities in which I would like to engage while I'm retired does not include serious stuff.
Okay, I get it.
Well earned. It's okay.
Yeah.
Well earned.
So Ron John, I'm in Hamilton County, and it looks like there are 9 House districts in Hamilton County. So how do we fix that problem? Or is it even a problem, I guess?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of what we've been hearing, a lot of people say their cities or their counties, a lot of the secondary cities and a ton of counties are just split. And right. So the solution is a couple of the legislators that we've met with say, redistricting is an issue, but when I only hear from 3 people in my district, I'm not going to waste my political capital on forcing this issue. And so, right, so one of the answers to that is the one that everyone says, which is we need to get hundreds of people calling their legislators to tell them. But at this point, right, if you do that, you can say, hey, just use the maps that the redistricting commission, deems the winners at the end. When we pick these maps at the end, the best ones. So first there'll be cash prizes if anyone knows anyone who wants to do that. But also, a map has to get an approval of a majority of the group, but also an approval of at least one member that's Democrat, Republican, and Independent. So that come to these meetings. If you're, or if you can't make the meetings, right, there's an email address where you can kind of send us your thoughts, or if you want to snail mail it, we can do that. But yeah, when we have this report, we will present the report, like we're going to give this report to the legislature, so they'll see what's in there. We're doing their job for them in some sense in getting all this public input. So yeah, definitely make your voices heard. Anything you tell me, put in writing, send me an email. I can definitely get it, into the data that we're going to look at when we make that report for sure.
So I'm just trying to think of the reason why, because we have a Republican supermajority, but most of Hamilton County is Republican. So why would they have split it? It's surrounded by mostly Republican, except for Marion is Indianapolis just below us.
Yeah, they might have split it because they needed some, right? So they probably needed some Republicans from some of Hamilton County to ensure that they had a victory in some of these other districts.
The other thing is that sometimes it's very, very personal. So you may have a state legislator who's in Hamilton County, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that that individual has a safe seat, or multiple. I mean, the one campaign that I managed here on a local level, so you're not dealing with the big redistricting issues that you do on the state level, but they redrew county commissioner lines in St. Joseph County, because there was someone who was on the county commission at one time, and they had a favorite individual, and they wanted to make the district safe for them. Well, they changed the boundaries on the districts there, and now you have in one of the most democratic counties of the state a Republican control of the county commission, all because this is how sometimes it can come back to bite you on the butt. This was a Democrat who redrew the boundary lines to protect a Democrat, but in the end, it lost the party a seat. But it can be on that personal level, like individual legislators have patrons who make sure that that seat gets protected. I don't know if that's what's going on in Hamilton County, but sometimes that can help you explain those sort of micro level boundary line issues.
It was actually very confusing during voting season because I kept getting mailers for someone who I swore was not running that I could even vote for. And then when I looked closer, I realized that we are lumped in. I'm at the very bottom of Hamilton County. I'm somehow lumped in with like part of Marion, I think. And he actually won, Democratic Senator Fadi Kadura.
Yeah, that was basically all I had.
So
yeah.
the last slide you clicked off, and it had it on there, a question I've had since the beginning, which I think on there you had 538.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of discussions about 538. We've had 2 special sessions about polling technology, statistics, voting behavior, predicting behavior, had a lot of post-election statistic conversations, why people are voting, why they're voting, etc. And so my thought from the beginning was the richness of 538, their models. We've had a professor of political science join us, former student of St. Mary's, and she teaches on polling and statistics and technology. And so she walked through even the new remind me where he is, which newspaper does he, was it Washington Post? No, where's the young guy, the statistician that she talked about that's rivaling 538.
Yeah, it's like The Economist.
Maybe that's what it is. That's definitely a good gig if he's a statistician. So So anyway, so there's all of this competition, which is great, and evolving thinking around polling and understanding voting behavior and the stats that go in the real micro details that they can really get to at this point. And we've seen a lot there. What do you know if there's been any marriage? And Pat, this might be even for you, is what marriage, if at all, has there been between the same technology and evolved mathematical thinking of 538 with now the need to redistrict, both on a state and congressional level?
So can you all see my screen with the map of Indiana up here? So this is the Atlas of Redistricting on 538. So this is the current district boundaries. But if you look at the top, I can click over, right? So I can gerrymander the districts to favor Republicans. And now suddenly all of the districts have a high likelihood of going Republican. I can gerrymander them to favor Democrats, and you can get 4. Some of them will be close, but you can get 4. You can try to match the partisan breakdown to the electorate. So then you'll get 3 or 4 that are close. You can make them highly competitive. Right? Indiana, it'll be tough to do this, but you can try to maximize the number of majority minority districts. So then you got to connect Gary to Indy. This is the one that mathematicians always ask me about. Oh, just make the districts as like nicely shaped as possible. So you could do that too. But yeah, they have this for every state, and it's fascinating what you want to do. And so like personally, I think in all else equal, I would want highly competitive elections, but these districts don't look as nice as the ones that are currently there. But yeah, it's crazy. It's really,
they've done it themselves, like on their own volition. They have gone and looked at redistricting using their own data. So they could win your contest. That's great. That's really great. Well, that answers my question. I thought it was going to be something a little bit more like, you know, the typical polarized worlds. We don't really talk to each other. We look at what they do, but we have our own thing. Yeah, no, not quite the thing. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, the trick was linking sophisticated sources of data about voting behavior to maps with census data, because, you know, like Ron John said, this has been done for over 200 years. It's just that in the past it was done sort of seat of the pants, and you relied on state legislators who had a good feel for the partisan nature of different neighborhoods and streets and communities. But you know, now you can be much more precise as you've integrated those 2 sources of data and better data on voting behavior.
So Pat, or I mean, are you able to speak about the states that have these independent commissions that draw the districts, and what criteria they use and how they function?
I don't know the criteria they get used. Ron John, do you have anything?
Ron John?
yeah, I'm not exactly sure. The way we're modeled, and I think we're modeled kind of off of California, but not exactly, is that we, in our public hearings, we ask people to weigh in specifically on communities of interest, but also on whether they prefer compactness or competitiveness. So we ask them to weigh in on criteria. So when we go and kind of judge these maps at the end, like, it doesn't matter what I think, we should judge them based on what we've heard in the public hearings. So rather than just like telling us, oh, make this important, it's hear what they have to say and go off of that.
That makes sense. Thanks.
And those the 2 competing criteria become increasingly at odds as Democrats and Republicans start being sort of residentially segregated. I mean, that just makes it much more difficult, which is where a long time ago, Ann and I had an exchange about this, and you know, the studies of which I'm familiar said those problems are in large part the result of this residential segregation. But you can still you can still draw decent district boundary lines and then get competitive districts, even though you've got residential segregation. It just may make the shape of them a little odd.
Yeah, and what makes that also difficult, right? Like, yeah, sure. If you don't care about shapes, then yeah, you can definitely do that. The problem is that there's always a higher likelihood then of just like cutting through communities of interest, because you need to grab this constituency from over here and that one from over there.
Well, it's also I mean, politically, the way that people think of gerrymandering has to do with odd shapes.
Yeah.
So if you have drawn an odd shape so that you create competitive districts, you're going to come under political attack because it looks like you have gerrymandered.
Which was my same thought about, communities of interest, where to me, I feel like competitive districts and community of interest really butt heads at the end of the day, because if you put one priority, like community of interest having a voice there, you make that district inherently less competitive. You might be competitive within the district or within that community, which would be fantastic. But I feel like those are the two. And then you're right, if you're going to do communities of interest and having representation, then you get that wonky shape as well.
There's one thing I should say about communities of interest though. So first is that they should not, right? So when I was mentioning like the RV industry or people affiliated with colleges, not all of them necessarily lead to, are divided along party lines. So when we were talking with people in the southern districts in the state, right, like Ohio River communities was kind of a big thing that came up. And that's sure maybe by where they live, but other than by just like living in southern Indiana, that's not really any different than the people that live just north of them politically. It's just more about what issues are important to those people. And then also some of them say, yeah, we want to keep these Ohio River communities together because we have an interest in common. But others were like, no, we should have two different districts so we can get representation in both. And so communities of interest don't always themselves want to be stuck together.
True. Like it would make, their power would be lessened or dissolved by not having two, right? And if they're all grouped together. So it's a matter of what their preference is and whether they can, if they do split up, then if they're going to be outvoted by others in that district and thus not have anything. That earmuff is a really good example, I feel like, of that, because I think if you cut that was a great example, because I think if you cut that in any way, shape or form, you're going to just dilute, that's the word I'm looking for, just dilute any remote form of representation for that particular community. And that still exists, the earmuff one, or did that one? Wow.
It still exists.
Imagine being the representative for that and having to travel or to,
Well,
go ahead, Ann.
so it just seems like, and you said this earlier, Ranjan, about, I mean, it's about what you're trying to achieve, right? And so, I mean, what you want, I think at the end of the day, is you want people to be represented, and through their votes and through their districts, to be able to have their voice represented through whoever the person is that they vote for. So, and I agree, it's not just the proportion of Dems and Republicans, but there's some, anyway, it's complicated, but.
Yeah, actually, the coincidence is I had a student in one of the last classes on Congress that I did. I thought that the 4th district sounded familiar. She did her case study in the Congress class on Jesus Chuy Garcia, who holds that 4th seat in the U.S. House, a 4th district Illinois seat in the U.S. House.
Fascinating. The other thing, the last thing that came to my mind was the complete need for education and communication. Like, I really hope that your commission, if one, like, my hope is obviously they would choose, because it's been something that you have put your stamp of approval on because it's well researched and obviously has gathered the appropriate constituency groups and voices and has that bipartisan nature to it. So, but regardless of whatever is chosen, the communication and the marketing, the PR has to be there for folks when they see, like Carla, if they see their particular area divided up into 5 different state legislatures, who is doing the communication to say, here are the goals. This is what we have decided. Let's say, even if it's that we ignored what the commission had to say, if they want to have this sense of fairness, the communication has to be there. Here are our priorities, like Ann said, here are our priorities, here were our goals, here's how we decided what the boundaries are. Now, this is obviously in a perfect world scenario where you want people, they're chosen in a way that you want people to know how they're chosen.
When 2010 was done, at least in Indiana, they were not particularly forthcoming with even, what outside consultants they used to get their non-census data. And so, yeah. So we're hoping to at least change some of that.
The other thing that caught my interest was you talked about districts where there's uncontested elections. And I was just thinking there's a variety of reasons for that. And I'm in Georgia, right? So it's one of the focuses in Georgia around, because there are a ton of counties where there's just uncontested elections. But the question is, I'm not quite sure it's always because of how the district is drawn versus people's perceptions about who might be able to win in a certain district. And so, again, it's not just how the district is drawn, but it's perhaps people's perceptions. And that's sort of a goal of the Democrats in Georgia right now is, let's just try to run people in all the districts, right? And, try to put up some competition, because what's happened, and it could easily be, the reverse party where people they're just letting the incumbents continue to, get reelected without any challenge. So again, I think perhaps not just an effective gerrymandering, but just in general, a little bit of just apathy, really.
Well, it's you have scarce resources, right? If you're a party organization, you have scarce resources, and you certainly don't want to waste those resources. So the perceptions that Ann's talking about can lead into a belief that you're wasting resources if you bother with those districts, and it becomes a vicious cycle, right? Mm-hmm. You don't run anybody. Well, then the feeling that you can't win that district simply grows as a result of that. And even when you get counter examples, and I give you Howard Dean's 50-state strategy with Obama, that really laid the groundwork for Obama being able to win Indiana and Virginia for the first time for a Democratic candidate, first time since 1964. But it wasn't sustained.
Right.
You sort of went back to those perceptions that you're wasting resources. And if you're a candidate, you have to be convinced, because you're expending your personal resources by running a campaign in those districts. And so even if you get somebody running, if there's a general belief that the other party has a stranglehold on that district, you don't recruit particularly strong candidates. You recruit weak candidates there. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then complacency sets in, and it's just not a good.
On the other side.
Right. Yeah. And I love the comment, because we have the same thing in Georgia, where you've got congressional members. And even like within the state legislature, they've been there so long, there's no need that they have to actually connect with their constituency, because they got a lock. And that's not good for, democracy, writ large. So,
So, Anne, we elected our first Democratic city councilman this year ever in history. So there's hope.
Yeah, and but it's just like and this competition is good. Like competition is good because it makes everybody elevate their game. It makes everybody elevate their positions, their connections with their constituencies. So again, it's just overall good for democracy to
Right,
have
but
that competition.
says the person that's not seated or not being challenged, because even if you majority, like let's say there are good people in the world, let's hope that someday, Anne, you will run and you will encourage that competition and you will encourage that
like
primary
Pat in
challenger.
retirement. I'm gonna be like chilling out. But
You
anyway,
know,
go ahead.
so but as we've learned, not to put, I'm not the pessimistic one by any means, but I hear Pat in the back of my mind saying politicians want to be reelected, et cetera. But more importantly, the person that, has that secure spot, enjoys everything that comes with it. Maybe they do feel like they're doing good, and that let's give them the benefit of the doubt, and that they do feel like they're enacting good policy for their constituents. They want to stay in that. They're not going to say, this is good for democracy, bring it on, so. And then, so by default, though,
Agreed.
they have to, if that's a priority, they have to enact some of these redistricting lines that encourages challengers to their position. So there's that balancing act.
Yeah, and
We hope
they have no incentive to do that, but
Yeah, and I'm going to sort of give Ron, John, and the commission some credit here. The truth is that constituency opinion won't matter on this. It's not as though anybody is going to vote against a member of the state legislature because they supported a redistricting plan that led to gerrymandering or non-competitive districts. Ordinary citizens are not going to pay that much attention. So the commission working with folks in the state legislature, that's what matters. Is they're the ones that have to get religion. It's not ordinary citizens. I mean, you need to get that to validate and legitimate the plan that comes out of there. But in terms of getting that plan put into effect, you have to have sold the process and ultimately the outcome to state legislators, because they're not going to respond to anybody but themselves. They're not so stupid. Even Indiana, they're not that stupid to believe that folks in their district will hold them accountable on that issue, because they won't. They won't. There aren't many issues, and that's not one of them. So what Ron, John, and the commission are doing is really, really crucial to this working.
Yeah, and the other thing that we're doing is actually we've met with staffers for the senators, for Braun and Young, because that For the People Act is going to be in the Senate here in a few weeks. And one part of it is creating these redistricting commissions in every state, but obviously just for the U.S. House of Representatives districts. But I mean, it's hard to justify having two different methods to doing these things. So if that was to pass the Senate and we had one way to do it, had a redistricting commission for those lines, I don't think the legislature would be able to justify keeping power for the other lines for more than one or two more redistricting cycles after that.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to keep up and see what comes of it. I have small children, so I will not be trying to redistrict Indiana, although part of me really wants to try. Part of me really wants to try.
Put one out and have them paint it. It'd probably be better than what's there now.
That's true. My 3-year-old came up with this. Surprise. Carla, Ann, anybody here? Anybody else have any other thoughts or comments? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And so
great lecture. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ann. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much. It was a good lecture.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It was even good the second time around.
You're CC'd on the email. So if anybody has any questions, comments, especially with those, we're gonna have a bunch to be watching the recording. So if they have any questions, they can just shoot you an email. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Have a
Thanks,
great night.
Bronco.
We gotta play some tennis again at some point.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Awesome. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.